It's Sunday, September 13th, and this is the Real in the Field Goals Instant Reaction podcast where we come to you right after the Seahawks game, win or lose, in this case lose, and tell you our thoughts, exactly what happened. I'm Kenneth Arthur, and with me is Danny Kelly. We're both from Field Goals, which you probably know, and because this is Real in the Field Goals, you got to put those dots together by now. And the Seahawks lost 34-31 in St. Louis to the Rams. They scored 18 points, the Seahawks did, in the fourth quarter to take the lead at one point before allowing the Rams to score a final minute touchdown to force overtime. The Seahawks tried an onside kick in overtime, giving the Rams field position to go in and kick a field goal. And then when they had their return, the Seahawks had gotten all the way to the 40. Looked like they had a good chance to at least tie the game and continue overtime, but on 4th and 1, needing 1 yard, they ran the ball to Marshawn Lynch. Danny, should they have thrown a slant to Ricardo Lockett?
I mean, it would have been pretty funny if they did.
Yeah.
Funny is putting it loosely, I guess.
So overall, though, this is a pretty not a great way to start the season. What are your first thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's disheartening. Obviously, I think I really didn't like how they played on defense at all. They were missing tackles. They looked like there was a couple busted coverages. Obviously, that touchdown late in the game, Deion Bailey just slipped and fell, and so he got beat deep. Just trying to think of some other thing. It's just like Bobby Wagner didn't look great. They didn't get a lot of pressure, even though. Or at least it didn't feel like they got a ton of pressure, even though the Rams have like a terrible offensive line. You didn't see much of Frank Clark. I just didn't like the defensive play very much. I mean, obviously the offense has a long way to go as well. But to me, the biggest takeaway was like this did not look like the Seahawks defense at all. They gave up 34 points, which is more than any game they gave up last year. They gave up 30 to the Chargers and the Cowboys, and then those were the two highs of the season. So obviously starting out the season, giving up 34 points to a Rams offense that was pretty anemic last year is disconcerting. The Cam Chancellor thing comes to mind. Obviously they're not the same team without him out there. I think we all knew that would happen. But obviously a lot of us were hoping that it wouldn't be quite as striking. Right. I mean, I don't think if Cam was in there, that touchdown, it's not like Cam is like really good in man coverage anyway. So it's like, it's apples and oranges saying, but I think it did have an effect not having him in there. Like emotionally, they didn't have a lot of juice. Overall, it was just disappointing.
Yep, the 34 points is the most that they've allowed since October of 2013, and then they didn't allow it all in 2012, just counting regular season. But they're now 1-17, including the playoffs under Pete Carroll, when allowing 30 points, their one win being the 2010 playoff game against the Saints. Mm-hmm. So today proved any different. It looked like they were going to pull it off perhaps, but they didn't. And yeah, the thing with Cam Chancellor, I think what I was really worried about wasn't necessarily from a scheme standpoint of Cam not being there, but mostly just an attitude standpoint. Yeah. And like you say, it definitely showed that there was a difference. This wasn't the Seahawks defense that we had become accustomed to from seeing for the last 3 years. So to go the last 3 seasons only having allowed 30 points 3 times, and then just right out the gates, when the Rams are installing a new quarterback, their top 2 running backs are out, their top receivers out, and then they just pretty much, move the ball at will. What do you think was going on with so many open wide receivers?
Well, there was a couple breakdowns in defense where they threw it to tight ends kind of in the mid-level, and I don't really know. I'd have to look at the all-22 to figure out what happened there, but that's disconcerting. So, I don't really know. I mean, they just didn't look like themselves. Earl Thomas didn't really factor in much, which is a little bit expected considering he kind of missed the whole preseason. It was just they didn't look like themselves. It's hard to explain, but they just did not look like the Seahawks defense that we're used to. Not intimidating, and Nick Foles made some really good throws as well. So Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens this week if this spurs the Seahawks to do anything with Cam, or if they hold fast and just kind of chalk it up to a bad game or what. But yeah, it was not a good performance.
Yeah, it seems like maybe like at the same time, this was one of the toughest games that we thought they would have to play. It's 10 in the morning, whatever, and
Yeah.
it's on the road. It's the Rams. They lost there last year. Maybe more so, this is a good start for St. Louis than it is a terrible start for Seattle.
Yeah, and it's funny because this is like we talked to Joe earlier this week, Joe McAtee from Turf Show Times, and he was like, I guarantee you 100% the Seahawks will lose or the Rams will win and then
Yeah,
they'll lose next week to like whoever they're playing, some crappy team.
right.
It's just like for whatever reason, the Rams always play the Seahawks well, play them tough.
Yeah, they got nine. They got 9 QB hits on Russell Wilson, which feels like a lot. Two
Yeah.
sacks
I
by
mean,
Aaron
I will
Donald.
say that, sorry, I will say that I think they were doing empty sets a lot, and Russell just like refused to throw the ball.
Yeah,
I think several of those sacks, they gave it 6 sacks, which is ridiculous. But several of them to me were on Wilson, just like not pulling it or not like throwing it or throwing it away. He just takes more sacks than the average quarterback, I think, because he always thinks he can get away instead of, just throwing the ball out of bounds.
but I will say he had the most throwaways last season of any quarterback by a good margin. Maybe he's just managing to do both: take sacks and throw the ball away. It
Yeah,
did
that's interesting. I
overall.
didn't realize.
Yeah,
It
but
didn't
by
feel
a
like
good
that for
margin.
sure.
Overall, just it didn't. It just seemed like not a good game from Wilson, and it seemed
No,
like he was
he did
missing
not.
the targets.
He did not look strong either. I think during the fourth quarter there, he kind of turned it on and was really clicking, and that helped him get in the lead. Also, having that strip sack for a touchdown by Kerry Williams helped. But overall, not a good game for Wilson, in my opinion. I don't think he had one read option where he pulled the ball and ran with it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that hurts their running efficiency or what. The Seahawks had 124 yards on the ground, which isn't terrible. But Wilson, I think, let me see how much he finished with. He finished with 31 yards on 8 attempts.
Yeah,
So, and those were all scrambles as far as I can tell. So,
yeah, not good. I mean, like for him, averaging over 7 yards per carry last year, he averaged 3.9 today and had as long of 10. So that means he had 7 carries for 21 yards on the rest of his attempts, whether they were scrambles. But Marshawn Lynch, he was 18 of 73. I didn't necessarily. He had a couple times when you realized, yeah, this is Marshawn Lynch. But overall, everything just seemed a little disjointed on offense.
yeah, they really didn't get into a rhythm. They were trying to do some quick passing to break up sort of the Rams' really strong pass rush, which makes sense. But at the same time, they just were having it was just not effective. The only time they really got into a rhythm was during the fourth quarter when they were kind of attacking downfield and Russell Wilson was slinging it. But during the rest of the game, they were trying like these little dinky like bubble screens and driving everyone insane. So the interesting thing that is so for them with the Bears, and so those are always tough. But yeah, we'll see what happens next week, and hopefully, like you said, it'll be a little bit better mood to do this with.
Yeah, that'll be good. And if they can beat him, obviously, we want to get Cam back, but with or without Cam, they're going to have to play a lot better next week to beat the Packers. So
Yeah.
that'll be an interesting one to watch. And this is the field goals, Reel in the Field Goals instant reaction podcast. Sorry, I'm all aflutter because of the defeat. See, I can't even talk. But yes, you can follow Field Goals at Field Goals on Twitter. Go to fieldgoals.com. Follow at Kenneth Arthur S. Reel in the Field Goals is brought to you by the Ballard Agency. The theme goes 425-454-3510. And tell them Field Goals sent you. And yeah, so that's the Ballard Agency. And join us again on Thursday for the next episode of Reel in the Field Goals, where we'll be previewing their game against the Green Bay Packers. Danny, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
All right.
lot better in the second half. It looks like they kind of wanted to get him involved over the middle, which is great. So that was encouraging, definitely. Overall, it was a really discouraging game from a lot of angles. And the other thing that Pete Carroll said when he did his press conference is that the punt return touchdown, which I actually noticed this, like the Seahawks had like all their guys on one side. The punt, John Ryan mishit it and it went like across the field. So he essentially punted it to the wrong side of the field, and the Seahawks coverage team was guarding or whatever. It was like covering the wrong side of the field. And so those are two major special teams breakdowns again against the Rams that, contributed to this loss. Definitely. Obviously getting the return touchdown from Lockett was huge, but again, it's just like, God, they just didn't execute when they needed to. Obviously the fourth quarter letdown when they had the 7-point lead late, like that's huge. It's just not a great first week, but
the Seahawks,
I tweeted out like earlier, like you cannot judge the NFL season by week one. Like you just can't. Like I understand people getting concerned about this, and I'm definitely concerned about a lot of things, but it's like take a step back from the ledge. It's like this is week one. Shit happens. It's last year the Patriots lost in week one to the Dolphins, the Chiefs lost to the Titans, and the Cowboys lost to the Niners in week one. So it's like, just take a step back. It's all right. We'll figure it out.
When you account for sacks and the yards lost on sacks, Russell Wilson averaged 4.7 yards per pass compared to 9.5 for Nick Foles, who they only got to twice, one of which was Kerry Williams coming around, and it was obviously a great play and a nice call there. It worked out in the sense that it looked like it could give the Seattle the win. It didn't happen that way. Overall, did you get an impression of Kerry Williams' first start with Seattle?
There was one play, it looked like he did not know what he was supposed to be doing when they had a tight end motion out to the wing and he didn't pick him up. But other than that, I didn't really notice him. So I guess that's a good thing. Obviously when that fourth quarter touchdown to what's his name, the tight end for St. Louis, when they scored that, they actually immediately panned to Kerry Williams as if to blame him for it all, which I thought was kind of funny, even though he wasn't the one in coverage.
Yeah, I made them. Because of that, I made the mistake of blaming Kerry Williams on Twitter, and then I just had like a dozen immediate replies of like, no.
Yeah, no. It was. I just thought that was kind of funny. It's like, let's just assume it was Kerry Williams,
right?
Coverage. But I don't think he had a bad game other than that one play. I could be wrong, but obviously it's kind of tough to see the corners when they don't really show them on the replay or whatever on the TV broadcast, but we'll see when the all 22 comes out. Overall, he didn't give up a touchdown deep. I think it was interesting that they had Richard Sherman playing in the slot, and then Deshaun Shedd would come in and play outside in their nickel package. So instead of having like a Marcus Burley come in and play the slot, they just had Richard Sherman play it. So that was really interesting. I think that tells you how good of a player he is, because that's not an easy position, especially for a 6'3" guy. He got beat that one time late in the game with Stephen Bailey. I think it was in overtime actually. But that was just a beautiful pass right over, like it was just a teardrop right into his hands. I think Richard played it pretty well. But yeah, other than that, he looked good out there in the slot. So that's an interesting development. Might change once Cam gets back. We'll see. But if that's kind of like what they're doing going forward, that could be an interesting development.
Overall, the Seahawks, they won the time of possession 37-28 to 28-32. They won the turnover battle. The Rams had 3, Seahawks had just 1, and they had more first downs. So it's definitely one of those anomalies where you would think that, if that happens, you're going to win. The 352 yards that they allowed, they only did that twice last year, once against the Chargers in week 2 and against the Cowboys in week 6, both losses. And then also they did it against the Patriots in the playoffs. So it does happen. They don't seem to win when they don't play that well on defense, as most teams don't. I'll also say that the Rams, they did beat the Seahawks last year. They beat the 49ers last year. They beat the Broncos last year. They destroyed the Raiders and Redskins in consecutive weeks. If those remembered that they went 76, they outscored them 76-0 in those 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Weren't
So
they
this,
one of like the only teams that had 2 straight shutouts?
yeah, and actually, if you go back to 2012, only the Seahawks and Rams have 2 shutouts in that period of time. The Rams happened to be back to back, but only 2 teams, the Seahawks and Cardinals, have more than 1 shutout since 2012. But yeah, that it's not a good game necessarily, but you probably weren't going to go 16-0. So, if you were going to lose a game, week 1 seems like a good time to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not. I feel okay after this game, mostly because I'm not surprised that it was a tough one. I think we talked about how it's going to come down to like the last minute, as it always seems to do with the Seahawks. One surprise was for me was that it was such a high scoring game, but at the end of the day, like nothing was really all that surprising for us. The Seahawks defense looked worse without Cam Chancellor. That's not entirely surprising. Their offensive line gave up 6 sacks. We've been saying that all week, that the offensive line is going to be it's going to struggle against this defensive line. Not surprising. It's disappointing that they didn't play better than what we were expecting, but to me, this really isn't surprising. So, hopefully it's a good area, or it's a good game where they can kind of galvanize and learn from it. But, overall, we knew it was going to be a tough game. I figured it was going to be anyway. And so it's just going to be interesting to see what happens this week with Cam Chancellor, if anything.
Yeah, we'll see if anything does happen. I don't think the Seahawks are going to just like you overreact. They're going to take it for what it is, and it's not like they're just going to go in there and throw a bunch of money at him because of one loss that barely was a loss. Although obviously they did not know how to defend the Rams today, which is something that I don't think I've said in over a decade. So it's disheartening. It's not a good game. There were a couple maybe good things to come out of it, like Tyler Lockett. Michael Bennett had a good game. Cassius Marsh had a sack. He did something. So there are some good takeaways, but they got to come back and be a different team if they're going to have any chance of beating the Packers in week 2. Which we will have another instant reaction podcast after that, and hopefully one that is less somber because a win over Green Bay would definitely, I think, don't you think that if they beat the Packers, that sort of erases this loss in a way?
It definitely will help. Obviously we talked about it, how the Seahawks could start 0-2. They have a really tough road schedule to start the season. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be another tough one. And I think if they win in Lambeau, that's going to be huge for them, kind of coming back home and getting their home schedule started. So obviously it would be great if they could win in Lambeau. But like this week, it's going to be tough. I mean, I don't think that the Packers didn't look all that impressive today from what I saw in terms of watching the Red Zone channel, but they were on the road as well. So, and that's a divisional matchup too. So for them with the Bears. And so those are always tough. But, we'll see what happens next week. And hopefully, like you said, it'll be a little bit better mood to do this with.
Yeah, that'll be good. And if they can beat him, obviously, we want to get Cam back. But with or without Cam, they're going to have to play a lot better next week to beat the Packers. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. And this is the Field Goals, Reel in the Field Goals Instant Reaction Podcast. Sorry, I'm all aflutter because of the defeat. See, I can't even talk. But yes, you can follow Field Goals at Field Goals on Twitter. Go to fieldgoals.com. Follow at Kenneth Arthur S. Reel in the Field Goals is brought to you by the Ballard Agency. The theme goes 425-454-3510. And tell them Field Goals sent you. And so that's the Ballard Agency. And join us again on Thursday for the next episode of Reel in the Field Goals, where we'll be previewing their game against the Green Bay Packers. Danny, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
All right.